Kahane. Rabbi Kahane received smicha from the Mir Yeshiva. He is also a graduate of New York Law School and received his master's in international law and relations from New York University. Rabbi Kahane has devoted his entire life for Jewish causes, and he has done so with Mesirat Nefesh. He is also the founder of the JDL, as well as the Kach movement. Before the previous election, it was clear that Rabbi Kahane had a solid following in Israel, with polls showing that he would receive close to 200,000 votes. Unfortunately, his party was banned. Nonetheless, his efforts have brought major issues that were taboo in the Jewish community into the realm of public discussion. Rabbi Kahane is also the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat HaRayon, the Jewish Idea, which is located in Yerushalayim. Now it is my distinct honor to introduce to you Harav Meir Kahane Shlita.
We find in Sukkah, the Gemara in Sukkah says that there are 4 things that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is sorry that he made. He regrets that he made 4 things. Yishmael, which is understandable. Kasdim, understandable too. After they burnt the temple, the Mikdash. Yetzer Hara, which is also an understandable thing. And Galut. He regrets having made the Galut. And this is a bit difficult to understand. There's a reason for the Galut. There's a reason for it. The reason is as punishment. If the Jew sins, he's punished. The Galut is punishment. The Galut is a curse. And there's a reason for it, hopefully, that if the Jew sins and is punished, that he'll do tshuva. I think that the answer is that the Kadosh Baruch Hu saw in the end that not only did the Jew not become better, the Galut, but the worst of all possible things happened. In the Galut itself, and because of it itself, the very truths of Torah became corrupted. The Kadosh Baruch Hu never meant for the Jew to live anywhere except in one country, Eretz Israel. And the last time that I was here, I spoke about that. I don't want to go into that in any depth now. But it's clear that when the Kadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, he didn't free us from Mitzrayim and then said, now go anywhere that you want to. You can go to Amsterdam Avenue. The Kadosh Baruch Hu insisted that the Jewish people go to one country, Eretz Israel. And those Jews that did not go, that refused to go, died out. Chabushim alu b'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim. So the Medrash says that 1/5 of the Jews left. There were some that said only 1/50th left. There's some that said only 1/500th left. In any event, at the very, very best, 1/5 left. And the rest, who refused to leave and wished to stay, died out. And the clear reason why the Kodesh Baruch Hu insisted that we live in one country is because the Torah and Yadut stress isolationism. Hen am levadad yishkol. It is a people that dwells alone. Is not some poetry from Bilam. The Shir of Bilam is not some poetry. It's some kind of fancy prose. Hen am levadad yishkol means that the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants the Jewish people to be alone. Because if we are not alone, if we mingle with the Gentiles, it is impossible not to be affected by the majority culture. It is not possible for an Orthodox Jew who lives in this country not to be affected by the majority Gentile culture. It is impossible that the It is impossible that the authenticity of Torah shall not be watered down and corrupted by the majority culture. The very concept of a modern Orthodox Jew, the very concept of a modern Orthodox Jew is a concept that came into being in the Galut, in the West. In any event, it is clear that the Kodesh Baruch Hu regrets having made the Galut, which not only did it not serve its original purpose, but worse, it made the Jewish position worse in the sense that suddenly Torah truth itself became corrupted. I want to deal this evening with one of the Torah truths that became corrupted in the failure for us to accept Ol Malchut Shamayim. And that is the whole question which is so relevant in our times. The question of whether there is an Isur or whether one is allowed to give up parts of Eretz Israel. This is a question which undoubtedly, beginning now, will be a very practical question, a very real question, a question which will not only rip Israel apart, and not only divide Israel per se, but it will also divide the Torah camp. The Torah camp. There is a point of view on the question of giving up land, which says that there is no essential difference between giving up land and the question of Shabbat or Yom Kippur. And the argument goes that just as we know that there is a halacha that except for three essential basic mitzvot, Avodah Zarah, Shechut Damim, Ilui, Arayot, any other mitzvah, if there is a question of a danger to life, then one is obligated to violate the mitzvah. That's a rule, that's a klal, no question about it. And thus, for example, if a Jew is faced with a danger to life, he is obligated to violate Shabbat. If on Yom Kippur a Jew is very, very sick, and the doctor says to him, you must eat, he must eat. So the argument goes, if such essential basic mitzvot as Shabbat, Yom Kippur, can be violated because of a danger to life, therefore it follows that if giving up land will bring peace, and therefore will save lives in a war, therefore it follows that one should certainly give up land, and that land is less precious than even the life of one Jew. And this is the argument given by many rabbis. I think that it's not a correct argument, and you see why. And I think that it's that I'm not here speaking about some mitzvah or some Torah area, which may be an important one, but it's not one which is burning. This is a burning issue. Upon this issue, Israel may go to a civil war. Chas v'shalom. Chas v'shalom. But upon this issue, the Torah world itself may be split deeply. And it is important that we know precisely what the halacha really is, and why it is, and what it is, and how it is. No one argues the fact that Eretz Yisrael was given to the Jewish people by the Kodesh Baruch Hu. L'zaracha natati et aretz hazot, minahar Mitzrayim vad hanahar agadol nahar prat. The pasuk. This is the pasuk in Bereshit, Perek Tedvav. The Kodesh Baruch Hu speaks to Avram Avinu, and he says, "This land from Nahar Mitzrayim, which, depending upon which of the poskim, Foshim that you follow, is either the Nilus, according to let's say Rashi says the Nilus. And then there are more moderate commentators who say that it's only Wadi El Arish, which in any event would mean that the northern Sinai is part of Eretz Israel. Unfortunately, the government of Israel doesn't follow either Rashi or Ibn Ezra, or Sadia Gaon. In any event, that is clearly the fact that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us Eretz Israel, and it is not within our power to give it up unless it is true that the question of Pikuach Nefesh is also applicable to that. But certainly all of the poskim, all of the Gdolim in our time, certainly will say that if there is no Pikuach Nefesh, certainly there is an Isur or Raita to even consider giving up land. That's obvious. The Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us this land because he said, Aretz Chaviva Alai, Yisrael Avivim Alai, the land is precious to me. Israel is precious to me. So he said, Achni says, Yisrael Hachavim Alai, La'aretz Shehi Chaviva Alai. And so, a chosen people in a chosen land. A chosen people in a chosen land. And I just thought, just briefly, that's why no one should be living in this country, and I don't understand what you are doing here. I just throw this in there. Eretz Yisrael Mikodeshet Mikol Ha'aratzot. This is the Mishnah Kelim. And it's clear that this is so. And the Ramban says the following. The Ramban says the following. I quote the Ramban. Shenistavenu lareshet ha'aretz asher natan hakel larech lavotenu lavraham liyitzchak u'liakov velo nazva biyad zulatenu min ha'umot. We are not allowed to leave it in the hands of any of the nations. The Ramban holds that one is commanded to conquer the land, to start a war, and not to leave any of the land. This is what he says. And then he says, V'zuhi Chazal karin ota milchemet mitzvah. He says, this commandment to conquer the land is what Chazal call a milchemet mitzvah, a war of obligation. And that's what he says. The Rambam says, in Yichot Akum, Perek Vav, Lachav Vav, he says the following. Bizman sheyad yisod tkifa, when the Jews have the power, asur lanu lahaniach akum benenu. We are not allowed to allow pagans to live in Eretz Israel. We're not allowed to let them live there. Ad she yikablu alehem sheva mitzvot shenistavenu. In other words, there are the 7 of the mitzvot, and if they accept that, and if they also accept misim and avdut, then they are allowed to live in our land, not the citizens, but they're allowed to live with the concept of gel toshav, a resident stranger, which means exactly what it says. He's a resident, but he is a stranger. He's not a citizen. He's in the Knesset. So what does the Rambam say? That if they do not take it, then we are not allowed to let them stay. Shenemar lo yeshvu d'artzecha. They are not allowed to live in your land. Afilu lefi sha'ah, even for a moment. And the Rambam holds you aren't even allowed to let them pass through the land as tourists. The Rambam says, yeah, do we see from the Rambam? So the Rambam holds that even when we control the land, even when even when our hand is kifa, even when we have the power, you are not allowed to let the non-Jew stay in that country unless he accepts upon himself the Zayim Mitzvot and Misimin Avdut. How much more so to give him sovereignty over that land where he can do whatever he wishes. So here too we see, and nobody argues with this, here too we see that one is not allowed to give up land. Again, the question arises, does this hold true even when there is a question of danger to life? That's always the question. That's always the question. We find in the Tanakh many, many cases of nations going to war against the Jews. Many, many, many cases. Many, many cases. Many, many cases. We do not ever find one case. We never find one case, not one case, where when the nations came up against the Jews, not to force them to accept paganism, Avodah Zarah, but merely to take away land, or even less than that. We never find a single case in which a Jewish leader says, give them the land. We never find a single case in which he says, give them even less than land, even give them privilege. The classic case is the case of one of the Shoftim, Yiftach Agiladi. Yiftach, he was a judge. Not a judge like me, but a judge. A Shofet. Yiftach Bidoro, Ishmael Bidoro. He was the Gadol of his time. He was the Gadol of his time. And so we find in Shoftim, Perek Yud Aleph, that Yiftach suddenly hears, Vayilachamu b'nei Ammon im Yisrael. The Ammonim suddenly declare war on the Jews. And you can picture him sitting in his office. And he hears the Ammon wants. Why? Suddenly. So he sends a message. And he says, Mali velach, what's this thing over here? Why don't we go to war with me? Why don't I have a war? I'm peaceful. And the Melech Bnei Ammon answers him as follows: Ki lakach Yisrael et artzi. You have occupied my land. When Bnei Israel came out of Mitzrayim, you occupied the land. Me'arnon ad Yabov ad Hayarden. And then he adds what appears to be a rather moderate statement. V'ata, and now, Hashiva ten b'shalom. Hashiva ten b'shalom. Just give me back the land and let peace. Obviously, this is one of the more moderate Arabs. He's from Jordan, after all. This is the East Bank. It wasn't the West Bank. He says, just give me back the East Bank. Now, surely, as soon as Israel State Radio or TV announced that, he said, Vata Hashiva ten b'shalom. So immediately, peace now gathered, peace instantly gathered, and shalom miyad, and shalom toch shniyot, and daila kibush, and hala kibush, and maspika kibush, and maspik, and everything gathered and said, Vata Hashiva ten b'shalom. This is a moderate Arab. What do you want? Give it back on b'shalom. What do you want? War? If we have a war, then Jews are going to be killed. And what is he talking about? He's not talking about giving up Haifa, or Tel Aviv, or Yerushalayim. He's not even talking about the West Bank. So at the East Bank, give him the East Bank, and he's the East Bank. So clearly, a question here of halacha. Well, what do you do? Here is this Arab. So he's an Arab. What's the difference? Ammon, Arab, what's the difference? It doesn't matter. Here is this non-Jew. And he's offering peace. He says, look, you occupied my land. And that's true. That's no question about it. No question about it. The Jews occupied it. Sichon went to war. He lost. And as in most wars, losers lose. In normal countries, losers lose. Only in certain places do winners lose. So Sichon lost. And these are now occupied lands in Ammon's eyes. And he says, Vata Hashiva ten b'shalom. Give it back in peace. Yiftach does not give it back in peace. He doesn't give it back. And he says the following thing. And listen carefully to what he says, because in this lies, as you will see later, the whole concept of why one is not allowed to give up land under any circumstances. He says, you have an Elil named Kmosh. Kmosh was the Elil of Ammon, also of Ammon and Moab. Halo et asher yorishcha Kmosh Elohecha. Whatever your God Kmosh gives you, Oto tirash, that is yours, that you shall possess. That kol asher horish Hashem Elokeinu mipanenu, and all that he drove from before us, Oto nirash, that is what we possess. And he goes to war, and there's no question that Jews fell in that war. In any war, people fall on both sides. And he did not give it to them. So think carefully of his answer, and you'll begin to understand slowly and gradually why one is not allowed to give up land, and you'll soon see why it differs from Shabbat, Yom Kippur, and every other mitzvah. The second case, David HaMelech. David HaMelech is a story in the Tanakh, in Shmuel Bet, in Perek Yud. There's a war again with Ammon. Again, there's a difficult people there, Ammon. And Yoav goes out to battle, and suddenly he finds that Aram, the Syrians, have gone to help Ammon Jordan, and the Jews are now trapped. So he tells his brother, Avishai, he says to him, listen, he says, Chazak v'nit chazak, ba'ad ameinu u'ba'ad arei Elokeinu. Be strong and be strengthened for our people and for the cities of our God. The Radak explains this. He says, what do you mean the cities of our God? Shelo yichbeshu otam oiveinu v'yeshvu b'hem. That they should not conquer our cities and sit in them. V'im yasu kein, and if they do that, lo yu arei Elokeinu, then they won't be the cities of our God, ela arei Elohim acherim. Now listen to that and bear that in mind, and you'll see another key to what the whole concept of giving up land is and why it differs from Shabbos and Yom Kippur. The truth of the matter is that even one of the greatest of all Jews, Avram Avinu, was punished precisely because he waived the Jewish right to a part of Eretz Yisrael. Everyone here knows the famous story how Avimelech, Melech Plishtim, came to Avram Avinu and he said, let's make a treaty of peace. Vata Hishavana li Elokim, swear to me by God, Im Shaker li, Lenini, Lenechdi. כחסד אשר עשיתי עמך, תעשה עמדי. ועם הארץ אשר גרת בה. You lived in Eretz Plishtim, and I did chesed to you, so bear that in mind. Let's make a peace treaty. We won't go to war. Leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. And Avram says, fine, good. And he takes Sheva Kvasot, 7 lambs, and makes a treaty of peace. The Medrash says in the Medrash Rabbah, in Bereshit Rabbah, the following: Amalo Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Kodesh Baruch Hu said to Avram Avinu, Ata natata lo sheva kvasot. You gave him seven lambs as a sign of a treaty in which you allowed him to live, in which you said to him, I won't take away from you Eretz Plishtim. Eretz Plishtim is part of Eretz Israel. What kind of a treaty? Chayecha shani mashe b'simchat anecha shiv'at dorot. 7 generations, the Philistines will rule over you before you conquer them. Tana tatalo sheva kvasot. Kineged Cain banav, his descendants, hogim mibanecha shivat sadikim. They will kill 7 righteous Jews because of his sin. That was Shimshon, Chafdi, and Pinchas, and Shaul, and his 3 sons, and so on. And there's other things. The Rashbam says over there at the very, very end of Perek Kavbet, he asks the question: what is the connection between the ending of the story of this treaty, and which is immediately followed by the Akedah? Vashem Nisa et Avram. Why did God suddenly find it necessary to test Avram? What did he see slipping in Avram? What sin did he see in Avram? So the Rashbam brings down this medrash, and he says, V'chara apo al zeh, that God was furious over this. Shari Eretz Plishtim Nitan le'Avraham, that this is part of the promised land. Ubichlal Gvul Yisrael. And how does he go away for peace, giving up a part of Eretz Israel? And for that he was punished. That's the Medrash and the Rashbam. The question still arises. That's fine, this is good. But does that hold true even when there is a danger to life? Does that hold true? The Gemara says in Eruvin, Daf Mem He, brings down the following: Be'ir hasmucha lasfar, in a city which is near the border. Hafilu lo ba'al goyim, even if the nations only came, even if they didn't come, al iskei nefashot, to kill Jews. Ela al iskei teven nekash, if all they did was come and said, give us straw, hay and straw, and we'll go away. Yotzim alehem, the tlezayim, you go out with them armed, and not just you have to go to war against them. Michalim alehem et Shabbat. You have to start the war on Shabbos. On Shabbos, give them the hay, give them the straw. Give them the hay. America will give us back more hay. Give them the hay. No. What's the reason for this? And they bring down as proof that David HaMelech, when he was running from Shaul, heard that the Plishtim had attacked Keilah. Keilah was a city. And right over here, Gemara says that it was a city al asfal. It was on the border. And the Plishtim came only for Teven and Kash. And David asked in the Urim and Tumim, he said, should I go to war? It's only Teven and Kash. And the Kodesh Baruch said, Go to war. Go to war. Why? The answer lies in the whole concept of milchemet mitzvah. Listen carefully to this, because I find it difficult that people don't grasp this concept, which is all the difference between this mitzvah and every other mitzvah. The Rambam brings down in the Chot Malachim in Perek Hey, he says, Ein hamelech milcham tchila ela milchemet mitzvah. Kings don't go to war. There are two kinds of war in the Torah: milchemet mitzvah and milchemet reshut. Milchemet reshut is only a war outside of Eretz Yisrael. There is no concept of a milchemet reshut inside Eretz Yisrael. It's a voluntary war. A king decides to conquer land, like David did in Syria, in that part of Syria which was not part of Eretz Yisrael. So for a milchemet reshut, you need a navi, a sanhedrin. So that's not applicable in our times. Today there is no heter for any kind of reshut, milchemet reshut. But what is a milchemet mitzvah? The Rambam says, "Ve'ezuhi milchemet mitzvah." Zu, and he lists three categories of milchemet mitzvah. One, he says, milchemet zayin ha'amim, the war against the Canaanim to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Milchemet Amalek, that's two. And three, Vezrat Yisrael miyad sar sheba alehem. Any time that the enemy comes up against Jews, that is a milchemet mitzvah, and that is applicable in our time. There is no need for a navi, no need for nothing. If the enemy comes, that is a milchemet mitzvah. That's what the Rambam says. It's a Gemara in Sota, Yerushalmi. Ezrat Yisrael miyad sar sheba alehem. Miyad sar, when the enemy comes up against them. And he narrows this whole concept. What does it mean when the enemy comes up against it? What is he coming up for? Anytime or not? So we'll see what he means by yad, by sar sheba alehem. In Hilchot Ta'aniyot, the Rambam brings down the following. In Perek Bet, he says the following: Elehen hatzarot shel hatzibur shemitanim u'matrim aliyah. These are the public tragedies or the public problems or the public disasters that we have to fast, and we have to blow the shofar on it. And he brings down 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he says one of them is al hatzarat sonei Yisrael li Yisrael. Al hatzarat sonei Yisrael li Yisrael. Keitzad akum sheba la aroch milchama im Yisrael. When he goes to war against Jews, for what? O lahatil mehem mas, o likach miadam eretz. That is the category of Yatsal Sheba Alehem, whether he wants to take land or even misim, even tribute. That is a milchemet mitzvah. And that's why we saw in Eruvin that even when they come for kash and teven, you have to go to war. You don't give them the kash. Give them the kash. No, you don't. Don't give them the kash. You're not allowed to give them the kash. Because that is a milchemet mitzvah, a war of obligation. So the question now arises, but maybe a war of obligation, if there's a danger, you aren't allowed to do it. So here we come now to the whole concept of pikuach nefesh, doche, this mitzvah, that mitzvah, and we'll see why this mitzvah is a unique mitzvah and differs from Shabbat and Yom Kippur, and it's so obvious and so clear that it is amazing that people don't see. Why is one allowed to violate the Shabbos when there is a danger to life? Why? Think logically. Because the Shabbat is not dangerous per se. Usually, to keep Shabbos is not dangerous. So when once in a while it becomes dangerous, we say, violate the Shabbat this week so that next week you can keep it. The same with Yom Kippur. It is usually not dangerous to fast. See, if one time it becomes dangerous, you say, oh, good, eat this year so that next year you'll keep the mitzvah. This is what all the poskim say. This is the reason for it. And indeed, every mitzvah in the entire Torah is not dangerous. It is not dangerous to do the sukkah. It's not dangerous to put on tefillin. It's not dangerous to do anything. Usually. And when that rarity comes, when it is dangerous, so therefore violate it this one time, or these 2 times, or these few times, so that later on you can keep it again. But there is one mitzvah in the entire Torah which by its very nature is always dangerous. By its nature it's always dangerous. And that is a milchemet mitzvah. Picture the logic back of saying this. It is a mitzvah to go to war except if it's dangerous. The absurdity is so obvious. If we ever said, true, it is a mitzvah to go to war, as the Rambam brought down, if they ask for your land or anything else, there's no question about it, but only if it's not dangerous. If you made that argument, you would uproot a mitzvah from the Torah forever and permanently. And that's the difference. That's the difference. And that's why Minchas Chinuch says exactly what I just said here. The Minchas Chinuch in Mitzvah Kaf Hey, talking about a Mechemetz mitzvah, says the following. Nehi, it is true, he says. The Kol HaMitzvot Nidchot Mipnei HaSakana. It's true that every mitzvah, if there is danger, they are set aside. The danger transcends the mitzvah. That's true. Mikol makom, he says. Nevertheless, mitzvah zu, this mitzvah of a milchemet mitzvah, HaTorah tzivta lilchom imahem. The Torah commanded you to go to war. V'yadua, and it is obvious, it is clear, it is known. The HaTorah lo tismoch dinim al nes. The Torah does not give you mitzvahs and promise you miracles. It didn't say, you go to war and don't worry, nothing bad is going to happen. The Torah does not do that. The Torah doesn't have miracles. U'v'derech ha'olam, and by the nature of things, ne'haragim mishnei tzdadim beit milchama. People die on both sides during a war. By the very nature of war. Imkein, therefore, we see the HaTorah gazra lilchom imahem aftohu sakana. The Torah orders to go to war even though there is a danger. Imkein dichuya sakana b'makom zeh. It is the danger that is pushed aside and not the mitzvah of going to war. Minchas Chinuch. Logic. Of course this is so. There is no comparison between Yom Kippur and this. There is no comparison between any mitzvah and this is a unique mitzvah. This is a mitzvah in which God says, in this case, in certain cases, you must go to war. And since war by its very nature is dangerous, people have been known to die. Therefore, it shows that this is the one mitzvah in the whole Torah in which there is no concept of pikuach nefesh. The question is why? Why? Why is it? Why is it? What makes manishtana mitzvah zu mikola mitzvot? What makes this mitzvah different? Why does God say that if the enemy comes up and demands things, you have to go to war even though Jews will be killed? What? Why? And the answer lies in the concept of Kiddush Hashem, That's what Yoav meant when he said, if we lose this, our cities will become the cities of other gods. And that's a Chilul Hashem, because then they will appear to have the power. Then they will appear to be the true gods. That's what it means when we give up a piece of straw to enemies that come to us. It shows that we're afraid of them and don't have faith that if we fight, our God is stronger than their God. That's Kiddush Hashem. That is Kiddush Hashem in a national sense. I don't know how many times I brought down the great prakim in Tanakh, in Yecheskel, which is so applicable to our times and which explains clearly not only the concept of sanctification of God's name, but also the reason why there is a Jewish state in our times and what it implies for us. There's always been, for years, for decades, for 100 years now, there has been a tremendous struggle within the Torah camp between what one can roughly call Zionist and anti-Zionist. It isn't a very good label, because every Torah Jew is a Zionist. Which is what kind of a Zionist? But the Zionists, as we see it, are those people that accept the concept of a movement for a Jewish state and eventually the Jewish state itself, and those that say, for whatever the reason, no. Essentially, the question that arises in our times in these debates between the anti-Zionists and the pro-Zionists within the Torah camp, the argument is this Medina, is Medinat Yisrael, is this God's hand? Is it God's hand or isn't it God's hand? So, the anti-Zionists say, don't God say, what are you talking, what are you crazy? Look who created this state. The first Medina that we had, a good Jew created. Yeshua put on tefillin, kept Shabbat. That was God's hand. The second state, Ezra, Nehemiah, they were good Jews. They saw intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews. They broke it up physically. They were good Jews, racist a little bit, but good Jews. Thank God that they didn't live in our times. What? But this state, and this is the argument given by this state is God's hand. Look who founded it. And Guyon and Sapir and Golda Meir and all the label of non-observant Jews, how can you say that this is God's hand? And generally the answer given by the Zionists within the Torah camp is Satma. But that's no answer. You can't just say Satma. They have what is apparently a fairly decent argument. You don't just say Satma. Maybe Satma's right. Maybe. How do you know? Maybe he's right. So we have to understand what the state is, and that ties in clearly why one is not allowed to give up land and why one is not allowed to back away from the Arabs, and why every stone that is thrown by Arabs that a Jew is a Chilul Hashem. The Navi Yecheskel in Perek Lamed Vav speaks one of the greatest tragedy in Jewish history is that Jews in the Torah world have stopped learning Tanakh. It is an abomination. It is an obscenity. And worst of all, one of the greatest reasons for the perversion of Jewish concepts within the Torah framework. Without Tanakh, you cannot understand Torah. Know that. That's why in Pirkei Avot, they set down the curriculum. There is a curriculum there, given by Chazal. Why Jews don't follow it, I don't know. I have no idea. Ben Chamesh, Limikra, at the age of 5, you learn Tanakh. You finish Tanakh. You don't just go to, I learned to Shmuel Bek, and Lachem Aleph, Lachem Bek, and then I stopped because it was too hard to learn the Shayo. They learn Tanakh. They learn Tanakh. And on Tanakh, they then built the Mishnah. And on the Mishnah, then they built the Gemara. This is the way to learn. I'll start showing the Gemara at the age of 7. He learns about in Isha. He doesn't even know what in Isha is. He's 7. Tanakh, in any case. Yechezkel says the following. The Kodesh Baruch Hu speaks to him and he says the following. He talks about how the Jews sinned. V'afitzotam bagoyim, vayizaru ba'aratzot. I scattered the Jews among the nations and dispersed them among the various countries in which they were. Vayavo el hagoyim asher ba'u. And they came onto the nations whither they happened to come. They went to Morocco, they went to Poland, they went to Yemen, they went to Washington Heights, dollars. What did they do there? Vayichalelu et Shem Kodshi. And there, among the nations, they desecrated my holy name. What in the world does he mean? What do you mean they desecrated my holy name? I was in Borough Park. My pleasure. Rabbis, Rebbes, Rebbitzins, mikveh, black socks, white, tremendous pleasure. What are you talking about? Every house, a shaitel and a chandelier, tremendous. What are you talking about? What is he talking about? Vayechalu et Shem Kodshi. So he explains. He goes right on, and he explains why. Vayechalu et Shem Kodshi. When the nation said concerning Jews, this is the people of Hashem, and we drove them out of their land. You know what? Hashem means, what a desecration of God's name means. Jewish defeat in the eyes of the non-Jew means that the Kodesh Baruch Hu is either weak or doesn't exist. For 2,000 years, the Catholic Church proved to us why they were right. They said, you see, you were driven from your land. You can never go back because you didn't accept the right God. For 2,000 years, that's what they proved to us. The essence of Auschwitz was not that the Germans murdered millions of Jews. But as they murdered them, they mocked them and they said, where is your God? Let him help you now. And that's what David meant when he said, Lama yomru hagoyim ayei na Elokeim. How long shall they keep saying and mocking us, where is their God? And as Rashi puts it, Shiflutam shel Yisrael chilu shemo. The degradation of the Jew is the desecration of God's name. And in order to understand what that means, you have to look at the Hebrew. The English isn't an exact kind of a translation. A chilul Hashem. It comes from the Hebrew word halal. Halal, which means empty or space, a vacuum. When there is Achilul Hashem, we empty God from the world. It is as if he doesn't exist there. Because The nations say, if there was a God in Israel, he would not let us do this to his people. That's Chilul Hashem. So the Galut per se, the very fact that we are here weak, and that we suffer pogroms and crusades and inquisitions and Auschwitzes, that per se is Shiflutam Shel Yisrael, the degradation of the Jew. And that is Chilul Hashem in a national sense. So he continues, Vayachmol al Shem Kodshi, he said, I have pity on my holy name. Asher Chilu Beit Yisrael Bagoyim. That the house of Israel degraded and desecrated by being among the nations. Therefore say unto the house of Israel, Lo lemanchem ani oseh Beit Yisrael, that which I am about to do, to bring you back to your land, as you see soon. That which I am about to do, Lo lemanchem, it's not for your sake. You don't deserve it. Not that you're good. Lo lemanchem kim l'shem kodshi, because there's a certain point in Jewish history where the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, "Dai must speak." That's enough of desecration. So, despite the fact that we don't deserve it, but in order to put an end to this continuous centuries and centuries of mocking God, so the Kodesh Baruch Hu decides to begin the Geula, not to finish it, to begin it. V'kidashti et shmi hagadol amchulal bagoyim. I will sanctify my name, which was desecrated. V'yadu hagoyim ki ani Hashem. They will know that I do exist. Of course that I exist. How? B'hikatshi bachem le'enehim. When I sanctify myself through you. What do you mean through you? Through you. Just as God is desecrated through the Jews, when the nations oppress us and step on us and defeat us and gas us and burn us and kill us, so through us he is desecrated. So the converse is also true. I will cause a tremendous Kiddush Hashem through you, through your victory, through your coming back to Israel, through your prowess. That is how I will be sanctified through you. And he says, I will take you from the nations. And I will gather you up from all the lands. And I will bring you back to your land. That is why there is a Jewish state, not because the ones that founded it were good Jews. They weren't good Jews. They weren't observant Jews. They were Jews who were, you name it, that's what they were. And the whole thing is irrelevant. It's irrelevant, not for their sake, but because after the epitome of the worst Chilul Hashem imaginable, the Holocaust, the Kodesh Baruch Hu said, "Dai must speak, enough." That's why there's a state. And that's why a milchemet mitzvah, any defeat, we Arabs come and demand land and we give up. How? It's not ours to give up. How dare we think of giving it up? The Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us this state for one reason only, to sanctify his name. And we now go and give up land and retreat. That's why a milchemet mitzvah does not recognize for peace. We'll give up and we'll surrender and we'll give up this and so on. There is no such thing, because that is a Chilul Hashem, the very opposite of a milchemet mitzvah. And that's what we have to know, and that's what we have to realize. And the pity is that because of the Galut, we have become touched by it. And Torah truth has become corrupted by it and perverted by it. Not only in this area, democracy, suddenly democracy becomes a basic Torah concept. Unbelievable. Democracy is a basic Torah concept. Where do you see such a thing? Where do you see such a thing? Judaism is not Thomas Jefferson. It's not. Kabbalat ol malchut shamayim means that we accept upon ourselves Torah and Torah concepts as he decided, not the way we decided. And in the modern Orthodox world, there is as much a tendency to attempt to pervert and twist and corrupt certain basic concepts that we don't like, as there is among non-Orthodox Jews, among things that they don't like. The perversion of Torah in the whole concept of democracy and so on. Torah is not a democratic concept. It is democratic within the framework of halakha. So, of course this is true. A Sanhedrin voted, of course, certainly. And the majority ruled, of course. But that was because those people were within the framework of halakha. But to go and talk about Arabs having the same political rights that Jews have in Eretz Yisrael is worse than absurd. It's obscene. Because it flies in the face of everything that is clearly halakha. The Kodesh Baruch Hu told us that we have to live in one country for a reason. So that we should control our destiny and not be affected by a majority culture. So now we come and we say, Nachon, it's true. And Am Levadad Yishkon, and the Arabs should have equal political rights. It's not a question of Arabs, it's a question of non-Jews. Arabs are no different than any others. It's a question of good Arabs, bad Arabs. If every Arab tomorrow morning was good, it was a saint, a tzaddik. If Arafat tomorrow became, what can I tell you, the biggest Baal Tshuva that ever lived, he still would not be allowed to have the status of a Jew in Eretz Yisrael. That's the way it is. This is halakha. This is Kahane. The tragedy is that there are people that sit in the yeshiva for years and years and years and years and hear what I say and think that that's Kahanism. Unbelievable. Just one Rambam. Let's read this because I didn't come to really talk about Arabs today. I can't do that. Just one Rambam. Chod Melachim Perek Aleph. Som tasim alecha melech. A pasuk in the Chumash, in Parshat Shoftim, in Yud Zayin. Som tasim, which in the English is usually translated as "Thou shalt surely place upon yourself a king." That's good for English, but we'll see that that's not exactly good in the Gemara. Som tasim lechma. Mikerev achecha tasim alecha melech. From amongst your brethren, from Jews, so you appoint a king. Lo tuchal latet alecha ish nochri. You are not allowed to appoint a stranger, not a Jew. So the Gemara, this Rambam is based on a Gemara. And the Gemara says in Yevamot, why does it say som tasim? Say tasim. What is som tasim? So the Gemara is not impressed by the poetry of it. It doesn't. Thou shalt surely. So why something? Then nothing is extra. So it says, Kol misima asher atasam. Any authority that you appoint, lo yeh ela mekerev achecha, shall only be from Jews. And the Rambam says, v'lo lemalchut bilvad. This doesn't only refer to a king. Ela lekol the Kol Tzarot Shel Israel, to any authority in Israel, Afilu Mimune Al Amat Hamayim, even a pakid, even a clerk in the area, in Teddy Kallik's area, Shemechalek Mimena Lasadot, he's in charge of giving X amount of water to the fields, must be a Jew. It's obviously, it isn't even necessary for me to even say a dayan, a judge, or a nasi, a chaver knesset, shelo yeh ela Yisrael. Kol nisimot shata mesim lo yu ela mikerev achecha. Now that is not exactly a model of democracy. Because it is not democracy. Because it's Torah. And if we don't like it, we have a choice. You don't like it, choose democracy. But don't ever pervert Torah and say this is really what Torah says when it doesn't say it. Be a giver. Be a man. Have the courage to say, I opt for democracy and against Torah. Say it. But don't pervert Torah. Don't pervert. You can choose. The Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us the power to choose. To choose. You can choose life, you can choose death, you can choose Torah, you can choose good and evil, but you can't call good evil and you can't call evil good. That you have no right to. That you have no power to. B'kitzur, those people, those gedolim, of course, who paskin in this way concerning the question of giving up land, that it is not allowed to, because for all the obvious reasons that I gave. These are not people who want peace any less than anyone else. And I think it is obscene to call certain rabbis and gedolim hawks and others doves. That's obscene. That's obscene. In halakha there are no hawks and there are no doves. There are rabbis who learn Torah honestly the way they see it. And in Torah there is no such concept. There's no concept known as politics. Judaism doesn't know of politics. Politics is for those people that separate church and state. In halakha, we do not separate synagogue and state. There are Hilchot Shabbat, and Hilchot Kashrut, and Hilchot Kriyat Shema, and Hilchot this, and there are Hilchot Melachim, which means there is Hilchot Melachim, Hilchot Akum. What is the status in halakha of a Jew and a non-Jew? What is the status in halakha of boundaries? These are halakhic questions, not political questions. There is no such thing as a political question in Judaism. If a Shulchan Aruch tells you which shoe to put on first and which to tie first, you think that it's going to leave politics to politics? There is a law if one is allowed to give up land or not. It's not a political question. I like bacon. What do you like bacon? I like the right. I like tchiyah. What do you like tchiyah? A religious Jew that follows a party which is not a Torah party is as a Jew that doesn't know what he's doing. No party that doesn't follow Torah has anything to say to us, ever. Even if they appear to be saying the same thing. Because if it's not based on Torah and halakha, it has no hope of winning. The Kadosh Baruch Hu isn't a left-winger, and he's not a right-winger either. Al tat yaminu smol. A pasuk in Mishlei. Turn neither to the right nor the left. You follow Torah, halakha. And if the Satmar Rebbe is right, then you follow him. He has a far greater right to speak to you than Gandhi does. Halakha is not measured. I don't like him. What do you don't like? You don't like him? What are you talking? You like him? You learn Torah. You don't. That I don't like. What do you don't like? Who are you to like it or not to like it? That's all Nachut Shamayim. The Satmar Rebbe is within the framework of halakha. I think that his view is not the correct one. Nevertheless, it is within the framework of halakha. And when we reach a point where yeshiva students will picket a rabbi, then we understand the beginning of the disintegration of halakha. Politics into a shir, politics into Torah. If you have your Rebbe and he differs with it, fine, good. But for every single person to come and say, the Satmar Rebbe is the... What do you tell him? How dare we do that? Or any other Rebbe, any other scholar. In any event, to sum up, the Kuli Alma, everybody holds that there is an Isur of giving up land. The question arises, does that hold true even when there is a danger to life? And on that there is a split. And for some reason, there are those poskim in our time. Because I certainly can't find any prior to our time. There are those poskim in our time that hold that for the sake of peace, it is similar to that if there is a question of peace or war and a danger to life, then giving up land is precisely similar to Yom Kippur and Shabbat and so on. I hold that is not true, and that is a fundamental error, and the Minchas Chinuch here brings it down clearly. The fundamental difference between a Milchemet Mitzvah, of which giving up land is an essential part, as we saw. A Milchemet Mitzvah differs from all the other 612 mitzvot in that other ones, except for the basic three, which aren't allowed for other reasons. But any other mitzvah where there's a danger to life, you must violate the mitzvah, because the mitzvah per se is never dangerous, and therefore it is a phenomenon that now it is dangerous. Tomorrow it won't be dangerous. So therefore violate it now and live so that you can keep it tomorrow. But there is one mitzvah in the Torah which by its nature per se, it was created dangerously, and that's called Milchemet Mitzvah. A war of obligation. All wars are dangerous, always. There is always danger in a war. There's always danger. Jews will always fall in a war. And despite that, it is called a Milchemet Mitzvah, a war of obligation. That is why it is not comparable to any other of the mitzvot. And therefore as the Minchas Chinuch said, that the sakana is the chuya. We push aside the sakana and not the milchama. Any questions? Yes. Yeah.
You're talking about applying halakha to matters of the Jewish state today, but then why not go all the way with the halakha when you say that Arabs don't have the right to vote or take office?
Yeah. I didn't say
it. In Israel, you're saying that democracy doesn't apply, yet you propose having a democracy for Jews. Halakha doesn't have Jews or Arabs voting, so why not? Aren't you also mixing Torah with a non-Jewish concept?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The question, if we would attempt to impose as a minority that form of government upon the majority, you would guarantee a civil war between Jews. And that would be the worst disaster that could happen to the Jewish people. The worst disaster. I certainly do believe that if we can convince a majority even a thin majority, to impose Torah law, then we of course do it. Because then you take away from them their argument about a civil war. The worst thing in the world would be a civil war. God forbid, never even think of such a thing. And the civil war would follow as night follows day. If we as 15% or 20% would attempt to oppose upon 80% of the Jews, halacha. Of course you're absolutely right. Of course it isn't right to do it. But in this case, the civil war is dochedat for certain. For certain, and you don't find in the entire Tanakh that any Novi got up on his own and called upon the people, to overthrow the king and start civil war and so on. But you're absolutely right, no question about it. Democracy is not a Jewish concept. And the great tragedy is that we have to, because of love of Jews, that we have to hold back. And we have to, in a sense, waive this thing. And
how do you know your policy towards Arabs won't cause a civil war within the Jewish community?
Because there is no mitzvah to love enemies, we're talking about. What are you talking about? What kind of comparison is that? What kind of comparison is that? We know that this is the halacha, and that if we do that, then God will help us. But over here, if there's a civil war and Jews die, there can be nothing worse than that. Nothing worse than that. And I don't easily say that. Listen, believe me, it pains me. It pains me because I know that the Kodesh Baruch Hu, if the Jewish people don't follow Torah, that there's going to be tragedy in Israel. So I sit on the one hand, I don't want to have a civil war, and on the other hand, I see that if we continue in this way, I don't even want to think about what will happen. The Kodesh Baruch Hu is not going to sit by quietly. He isn't a kind of a Santa Claus. Everything, ho, 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 fun, yeah, everything's nice. The Kodesh Baruch Hu has char and onesh too. It isn't a happy thing. It isn't happy. Yes.
With regard to Gedolim, you speak about the Gadol. If you have to go and follow, what about the concept of Torah?
First of all, there's no such concept of that in our times. When there was a Sanhedrin, that is what it says. Within the framework, there was the Sanhedrin. You have to follow the rules. That's for sure. Today, there is no Sanhedrin, so nobody follows Gedolim. You follow your Gadol. You follow your Gadol. The proof is, if all the Gedolim in the world would say yes, and let's say the Bezer would say no, who would the Bezer people follow? 5 guesses. Who would they follow? And they'd be right, because nowadays there is no authority. Each Gadol is an authority for his Talmidim. And furthermore, you don't have to stick with that Gadol. In other words, many times throughout recent history, people switch the yeshiva, they switch this, they switch. And in short, if you are learning at a certain time with a certain Gadol, you are obligated to follow that Gadol. But you're not married to him. Many times. Rabbi Akiva's grandson became a chassid, and his father sat shiva for him. In those days, it was that was a tremendous thing. So how could he become a chassid? Because you have to have every Jew in his entire life, in every moment of his life, has to have his Gadol. Everyone has to have a Gadol, but no one has Gedolim as a Gadol. He's a Gadol, and if your Gadol says something, if you hold that this is it, then you have to follow it until you switch. If you're learning in this yeshiva, you have a Gadol.
So who's your Gadol?
You're asking me? First of all, it's none of your business. That's the first thing. Nevertheless, I will tell you. First of all, it's none of your business, really. Nevertheless, I will tell you. The Sephardic chief rabbi, Mordechai Eliyahu, is the one that I go to when I have a question. When I don't have a question, I don't go to him. I received smicha, and I didn't get smicha and his phone number. I know how to learn. And when I have a kasha, a shaila, I go to him. Just as you don't ask a shaila on every chicken that you eat. You have a shaila, you ask on the chicken. If you don't know something, you ask. And that is how it is. When I have shailas, I go to him. And he is my God. Okay? Now it's your business too. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Rabbi Kahane, assuming that Israel is run by halacha, do you believe that Jews who don't follow halacha would have the same rights to Israel as Jews who do follow it?
The same rights?
Rights to Israel.
Jews don't have a right to Israel. They have an obligation to Israel.
Okay, the same obligation.
Certainly, of course. Certainly.
To live in Israel, even though they don't follow halacha.
If the state decrees that this is the law, and they're in Israel, they will follow the law. I live in Israel. And I live in a country which has laws, many laws that I think are not only absurd, but terrible. I follow them because that is the law. That is the law. I will expect in a democratic state, if we can convince the majority to insist that this is the law, I will expect every Jew in Israel to follow it. That's not theocracy. That's called democracy.
Right.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah, that's right. Wait. Yes. Somewhere. Yeah.
I have 2 questions for you.
Yes, please.
First is, why were you convicted and imprisoned in the United States, a country with grounds?
When? I was convicted several times. I will try to give you the various reasons. I mean, the various convictions and the reasons. Yes. What? Yeah, go on, finish your question.
I wasn't talking about any specific conviction.
Okay.
Or more or less whether that contradicts being a rabbi or Rosh Yeshiva.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Second question is, all of us have an obligation. All Jews have an obligation to live in Israel.
Yeah.
Why is it that you did not give up your U.S. citizenship, and in essence had it stripped by the United States government when you assumed the seat of Knesset?
All right. As to your first question, among the many times that I've been found guilty, I'll just try and pick out. Every one of them was when I violated the law on behalf of Jews. I sat for a year in prison, in federal prison, for Russian Jews. You may think today that the Soviet Jewish problem was always there and Jews were always fighting for it, but that's because you're young. Before you were born, the average Jew in this country never knew that there was a Soviet Jewish issue. So I violated the law. We bombed Russian buildings and put the story on page 1. I'm proud of it. It was a mitzvah. It was a mitzvah. And 250,000 Soviet Jews got out of the Soviet Union from those days, when before that no one was getting out. And any Jew that did not get arrested in those days will have to answer to the great judge someday. No, but I'm now speaking. Now. It disturbs me tremendously, that a Jew with a kippah doesn't have the understanding that in the 1940s, precisely because Jews did not do the kinds of things that they should have done, violating the law, so as to raise the question of the Holocaust. Because of that, because they sat like what you apparently think rabbis should sit, 6 million Jews died. It wasn't only the Germans that killed them. It was Jewish silence that was a rather loud part to that crime. When I learned that, I decided that I would never, ever do what the generation that preceded me did. I am overjoyed that we took the Soviet Jewish issue, which was an unknown thing, and we put it on page 1. And in the news media, the only way to get on page 1 is to give them, as they say in Israel, action. Now, as to your second question, I don't understand what in the world do you see as a mitzvah of living. What is the connection between a mitzvah of living in Israel and being a dual citizen? The mitzvah, that's a question which wasn't meant for you to answer. It's a rhetorical question. Because I will explain to you why there is no connection. What? After I finish, I will be more than happy to let you ask a second question, after I finish. First of all, the mitzvah of living in the land has no connection at all with what kind of a citizen you are. There's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Israel. That's the first thing. But more to the point. The reason why I want to keep the citizenship is because I know that if I ever gave it up, they would never give me a visa to enter the country so that I could teach you what Judaism is. And I made my offer to the U.S. government. I said, if you will promise me that when I want to visit America, you'll give me a visa, here's my citizenship. They said, no, I know that. I'm barred from Canada today. I'm barred from England today. I know what would happen to me if I wasn't a citizen of this country. That's why I want to keep this in, only for that reason. Yeah.
Back to the first question.
Back to my first question.
From the law, deliberately, when you had an opportunity to open your mouth legally and speak out against Soviet Jewry, that's where the problem comes in. You didn't break the law in the Soviet Union. Secondly, you deliberately kept the back door open for you to leave Israel and come back to the United States. Because if the visa problem was really, if the visa was really a problem, you wouldn't be here tonight.
You know, one of the great problems is I don't mind ignorance, and I don't even mind sometimes arrogance, but the arrogance of ignorance is incredible. Excuse me a minute. Now you be quiet. Now it's my turn. A little derech eretz. If you don't have Torah, at least derech eretz. Why don't you ask me how did I get? How am I here? Rather than babbling like an ignoramus, I'm here because the State Department allowed me in for consultation with my attorneys. That's what the letter says. I have no right. It is their chesed. Why don't you ask me the question, how did you get in, rather than making that absurd chutzpah comment? The tragedy is that I have a hearing in May, and if I lose that hearing, I will not be allowed to come into this country. And coming back to your other statement about you could have protested legally. Oh, no question about it, of course. Brezhnev was absolutely happy. Just Kahane will get up and make speeches, and then he'll say, you know, you persuaded me. What we did was, the Russians couldn't care less about speeches or letters. What we did was we threatened the détente between America and the Soviet Union. When we bombed the Amtorg office, the trade office of the Soviet Union, and the next day, the then ambassador to the UN, Charles Yost, phoned me. He phoned me at the JL office. He didn't usually phone me. We're from different schools. And he asked me, Rabbi, please come down immediately. And he met me in the lobby of the U.S. mission to the UN on First Avenue. And he said, Rabbi, you're harming American foreign policy. I then knew that we were going to win. And I said to him, Mr. Yost, that's precisely my purpose. If the Russians want a détente, then let them pay. Let them pay by letting out our Jews. That bombing was a page one story. Where would my speech have appeared in the New York Times? Where would your speech have appeared? Where would anybody's speech have appeared? The New York Times doesn't put speeches on page one except if it's from George Bush. So, I went to prison. You think that I enjoyed sitting in prison for a year without a wife and family? You think that I enjoyed that? What we did was using the Mesirut Nefesh, self-sacrifice, for Jews whom we loved. And that's an obligation, and the tragedy is that more Jews didn't do that, and worse, that Jews didn't do that 50 years ago, when so many more Russian Jews might have been free. Yes. Yeah.
Rabbi Kahane, today in Israel there's a variety of Torah parties.
Yes.
Now, if the view is as simple as you made it tonight,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that it is or it's not, how come they don't agree with you? Because there seems to be a variety of opinions.
I think that anytime someone asks me that question, I can only say to them, ask them. Ask them. If you want to know why I say something, you come to me. You say, Rob, why do you think so? And I can answer you. I can't answer why I presented for you something. I presented for you. I think it makes a great deal of sense. The Minchas Chinuch thinks it makes a great deal of sense. Yeah, I think that you should come. I hope you took notes and said, Rav Kahane said for so. Go to a representative of Agudah, or Shas, or Mavdal, or Degel HaTorah, and say, sounds good. What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? And maybe they'll tell you what's wrong with it. My problem is that I write Sfarim, not just books. I write Sfarim. And I send it to great, great rabbis. And I ask for, is it right? Is it wrong? Give me. And nobody answers me. Nobody answers me. I don't mind being told you're wrong. Tell me I'm wrong and tell me why. What other Rambam didn't I see? What other Rashbam didn't? What other Rambam? What other Posek didn't I see? Tell me. But not to get answers is unbelievable. I had trouble speaking here tonight. If you think that, luckily, it's a great, great tragedy that I'm not the widow of Sadat. Or the head of the Labour Party in Israel. I had trouble speaking it. There was an effort made. Cancer was taken and was taken. All kinds of excuses. Now, if you want to know why they differ with me, go ask them. So certainly, Rav Shach was Rav Shach, who's a great gadol. He's an anti-Zionist. He doesn't accept Israel. He accepts it. It's there. No, okay, it's there. But he is opposed to the state per se. So if you feel that you want to follow him. But he's not against me only. He's against the concept of Israel as a state. And others also. Nevertheless, and I have to tell you this, what pains me is when I sometimes speak to great, great Gedolim, and privately they will tell me things that they will not say in public. before I was banned by the High Court in Israel, High Court. You can't go lower. When I was banned, 2 weeks before, I went to certain great rabbis, and I asked for a letter to the High Court. Not that I'm right. I didn't say that. I don't want to be carried away by extremism, but just in the letter to say that the things that I say are within the mizgeret shel halacha, within the framework of halacha. Maybe he's wrong, but he bases it upon halacha as he sees it. If I would have gotten that letter, the way the anti-racist bill was couched, if you base your views upon a sefer dat and so on and so forth, you shall not be deemed to be a racist. So it was an important letter to me. I couldn't get a letter. The day that I was banned, 2 hours after I was banned, I suddenly heard on Israel radio that one particular great rabbi, one of the leading rabbis, said Rav Kahane is a great scholar and he bases his views upon Torah. I didn't ask from him a eulogy. I wanted a letter. Now, why did he say that after I was banned? Why didn't he give me the letter before I was banned? I don't know. And I tried to ask him. Yeah, let's move from, yes.
My two somewhat unrelated questions. Excuse me. Number one, what do you think would be the situation in regard to Russian Jewry, oppressed Jewry in general, and also in regard to Jewish poor and in general non-Orthodox Jewry, if the JDL had the resources then that, let's say, the Federation has now? If you would have had those resources, what do you think you would have been able to do? What sort of projects would you have employed? That's number one. Number two. All right.
Hold on 1 second. I'm not sure. I'm not sure anything about it. Are you asking how would things look today if after JDL? That's the question.
Things have gone according to your plans, right?
Look, when JDL started, the federations were simply not giving money to yeshivas. It's very, very hard living now and knowing how things were 20 years ago. The yeshivas were not getting funds from the federations. There was no such thing as an anti-poverty program for Jews in the federations. It didn't exist. Jews in East New York and in Brownsville and in the South Bronx and in Mattapan and Boston and in areas of Philadelphia and so on lived in abject terror. There was terror there. So certainly what JDL did was through various measures of breaking the law. Of course we broke the law. Naturally, how else could we make these fat and wealthy and powerful people move? We took over the Federation offices 5 consecutive days. We held it 5 consecutive days. We kept answering the phones. Shalom, JDL. The truth of the matter is that I was arrested and we were fined and so on and so on. But the truth is that today the Federation does give money to yeshivas. And there is a Jewish anti-poverty program. And it's a good thing. And they should be given credit for it. But know who started it. And when certain activist rabbis now chain themselves to the Soviet mission, that's tremendous. But I know how that started. Because when we did it in 1969, everybody condemned us. Everybody, from Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, gay, everybody. Everybody condemned us. Everybody did. So it would have been a different world. 250,000 Soviet Jews got out. Do you know what that means? It's a tremendous thing. And I'm delighted today to see ads in the Jewish press, help us make Russian Jews frum, by certain groups that condemned us for doing the things which got those Jews out so that now they can make them frum. Yeah, I want to move from,
All right, let me go on to my second question. There's the issue of Jewish women in Arab villages. It's, from what I hear, somewhat of a crisis now on a small proportion. But could you please elaborate on the situation and what the Israeli government is doing, if anything, and what the other groups are doing about this issue?
Israel has 5,000 Jewish women married to Arabs. I'm not talking about those that live, the others that live with them. 5,000 Jewish women are married to Arabs. Now, understand that because of the law in Israel, the only way that she can marry him is by becoming Muslim. And there is 5,000 Jewish women converted to Islam. And most of them live in Arab villages, mostly in the Mishulash and the Galil. One does not envy the life, not only of a Jewish woman in our village, of Arab women. Nevertheless, many of the Jewish women go through a double hell. First of all, being the wife in a Muslim village or town, but more important, no matter that the fact that they are now Muslims, they are looked upon always as Jews. We receive many requests from the families of these women who have gotten a request from the women to contact us and to take them out of the village. It's not easy. If you think that one day they decide, well, I'm going to now leave, it's not true. They are terrified. They are terrified. The Arab will simply come right after them because the Arabs are not terrified. So we have a hostel in which we keep the women and the children. And it's known as a kach hostel, so nobody bothers them. What does the government do? The government doesn't do anything because it's democracy. And once the woman became a Muslim, so she is under Muslim law. And Muslim law states that the children are of the father and not of the mother. And the law of Israel recognizes the right of the Qadi, the Muslim judge, rather than the Dayan in this issue. Every time we take those children away, we have broken the law in Israel. We break the law. And there are all kinds of summonses and warrants for my arrest and other people's arrest and so on. When I was in the Knesset, that didn't bother me because they couldn't arrest me. Now they can arrest me. And who knows? I mean, who knows what they'll do? Who knows what they'll do? Nevertheless, I think it's a great, great tragedy that not one of the Orthodox parties has ever taken up this issue. I sat for 4 years with the Orthodox parties. You don't need Yossi Sari to make Orthodox Jews look bad. You don't need him. They do a great job on their own. So that's what we do with that issue. Yeah.
What's the current status of the plan?
Sorry, what?
The current status of your plan to form a religious Jewish state and to secede from Israel, and what halachic basis do you have for that?
Don't say to. The whole point is that we don't want to secede from Israel. The point is that Israel doesn't want the territories. So I do. The point is that when we created the second Jewish state, it was for the purpose of not having a second Jewish state. The whole purpose is to pressure Israel into annexing the areas. I don't want to secede from Israel. If Israel would annex them, there would be no need for a state. I mean, for the second state. The whole purpose is to pressure Israel and make it quite clear to them that if you don't want these territories, and if you're thinking of giving up these territories to the Arabs, know that will never be. there will either be one Jewish state over that entire area or two Jewish states, but there will never be a Palestine state there. This is the purpose of this thing. And we held our first Congress on January the 18th, Yerushalayim, because the original plans had been not to have it in Yerushalayim, but rather in the Shtachim, Piat Arba. And the army pressured the local council to cancel the Matnas, the center there. So it was held. It was a tremendous success. There was an army of news media there. CBS was there, NBC, CNN, ABC, everybody was there, and not the word appeared. That's also part of a tremendous, deliberate blackout of this thing. It appeared on Jordan television. Oh yes, that was on Jordan television. It was a tremendous write-up, a whole 3.5 minute story on it. And that's good because most people watch Jordan TV at 7 p.m. So the way it stands now is the Congress was held, and right now we are doing the daily work of building an infrastructure. A census is now being taken. Elections are going to be held. We're creating shadow cabinet ministries and so on. And hopefully there will be no need for this ever. Hopefully. But it is important that the government of Israel know that this is not going to be the Sinai. This is going to be a very different story. They will not be able to give up those areas. There will never be a confrontation with the army. God forbid. There is no need to. There will be 100 and 50,000 Jews pouring into that area, just sitting. If kind of physically, it's not possible to drag out 150,000 people. He needs 4 soldiers for every single person. And once they get him over the green line, he picks she picks himself up and goes back again. So and they know it. They may try to stop it by arresting me and some of the leaders, which is fine. That will not stop the movement. This has caught on now. This has caught on, and arresting people is not going to help them now. If Shamir was a clever man, he would go to America and say, "Look, I'm ready to make concessions, but these crazies over here, make me the villain. Say, this could be. I mean, look at that guy's crazy." That's called good guy, bad guy. But for that, you have to have seichel. Yeah.
Halachically speaking, we're not allowed to benefit from an isur. A person is not allowed to benefit, halachically speaking, from an isur, from an aveira in order to do a mitzvah. Right. Not allowed to steal the statement Torah in order to read it on Shabbos. If Golos is essentially an aveira, why should any Jew in Israel accept $1, accept any kind of donation, and thereby receive a benefit from this so-called aveira?
The aveira, he's not benefiting from the aveira. There is the aveira of living in the Galut. And there is a mitzvah to give tzedakah to Eretz Yisrael.
It's not considered divine.
Let me say something. Let's say someone who is not an observant Jew. That's right. He's Mechal Shabbos. Should we not let him daven? Obviously, yes. He's Mechal Shabbos, which is one thing. But let him daven. The same here. You're sitting here, you shouldn't be. It's a sin. At least try to do, while you're doing this thing, at least do mitzvahs too. In other words, it isn't as if that this comes out of your living. This is separate. This is separate. Would you not take money from someone whose store is open Shabbos? By keeping open Shabbos, it's an aveira. But he has a mitzvah to help, do mitzvahs. I would dearly love for every Jew to leave America and come to Israel with his money. I'd love to do it. But, yes. don't you stand up? What? Yes.
About Chilul Hashem.
Chilul Hashem, yes.
So I want to know what the newspaper is speaking about, not definitely opinion,
Yes.
what the newspaper is saying about what we are doing in the way we are defending ourselves. It's not Chilul Hashem.
What? I'm sorry. What?
Our plans
Yes.
to save our land and our people
Yeah.
in the way we fuel a lot of money. It's not going out of Chilul Hashem like
No. What Goyim say about a Jew who is doing something right has no relevance. I can assure you that when Yeshua went in and did what he did to the 7 nations, he didn't win any great press in the outside world. So what? That's not the point. The point is that if it is a mitzvah to do something, then that's it. Then that's what has to be done. Yes.
miracles, and we were seen someday in the world as a brave and special nation. Whereas today, our credit is not as much as foreign, so we are seen as bad people.
You think that when we went in to Israel 3,000 years ago and massacred the civilians, you think that that was looked upon by the world as a brave people? Come now, I mean,
And they came just to prove themselves that they were better than us because they wanted to show, oh, this you consider it a brave nation. We try to be braver than us, better than us.
they try to save themselves. What do you mean they try to be better than us? They were afraid that we would kill them also. And that's the only reason why they came. We're going to become better. I want to tell you something. Many things in Torah bring down sinner upon us. The rabbis asked, why was the mountain called Sinai? Shemisham Yalda Sinai Yisrael. From there, hatred came from the world. When Jews call themselves the chosen people, do you know how many Gentiles get angry? So therefore, you're going to stop being chosen? I think it is great to be chosen. And if any Gentile wants to be chosen, join us, become a Jew properly, and you'll be as chosen as I am.
Rabbi, one more question.
Yeah.
One more question.
One more question? Yes, okay. Yes.
What I wanted to ask is if you believe that you really have some strong rational points here, and I think you've won over a good deal of the audience tonight, what I want to know is how come your movement in Israel makes such strong use of non-Jewish, essentially fascist paraphernalia such as yellow shirts, slogans, and symbols? Do you feel this is what your followers really need?
Listen, let me are you bothered about yellow shirts? What if I had blue shirts? You mean any shirts? Any shirts, right? So therefore, you don't like the fact that, for example, B'nai Akiva wears uniform shirts, right? That's also bad to you, right? When was the last time you got up and made that statement to someone from B'nai Akiva? Tell me. Any case. Wait. Look. First of all, you must understand that we are going to a Jewish people which unfortunately and tragically has been turned away from Judaism and from truth and has tragically been brought low from a position where they were once high. For example, there has yet to be written the definitive book on what was done to the Sephardic Jews in Israel. I want to tell you, if you want to talk about racism, that was racism, what was done to Sephardic Jews. We're taking people who were on a tremendous level of kedusha and holiness and so on, and taking them and ripping from them all of their Judaism, all of their Yiddishkeit, and bringing them into a world that they had never known before. What Moroccan Jew knew murder and robbery and rape and bank robbery? Whoever knew of such things in Morocco or in Iraq or in Libya? Whoever knew of such things? They were taught that when they came to Israel. Therefore, I now come to people that I have to win over. You think that if I come to some development or some neighborhood and I give this kind of shiur, do you think that they're going to stand and listen to me? You have to win them over by the kinds of things, by emotion, before you can raise them up to the point where they understand you should be a good Jew, not through emotion, but through Torah. I live in the real world. I live in the real world. The world isn't some kind of a kollel. In a kollel, you can sit and have the perfect world. And believe me, I sat in a kollel for 6 years, and it was a pleasure. But in the real world, Jews are suffering, and you have to live in that world. And I would like to change that world, but in the meantime, I'm living in that world. Why is it that the same Jew in that development town who wouldn't look twice at Mafdal or Aguda or Dega can't stand at Dusi? He loves me. He wears me. Gever ata gever. Why? Because I speak to him about the things that he wants to hear. And if he'll love me, he'll also accept from me eventually Shabbos too. He'll never accept Shabbos from Rav Shach. Never. He'll accept it, if there's any hope, it's from me. Because I come into his neighborhood. I speak his language. What am I going to speak to him? Torah? I wish I could. I wish I could do it, and then he would listen and say, Nachon, atan tzodek. But that's not how it is today. We're paying the tragic price for what was done to them over the last 40 years, and Orthodox Jews did nothing about it. That's the tragedy. Is that it? Sorry, I was just told that that's it. I'm sorry. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kahane. If anyone would care to help us form a Koch society here or in Stern, please see me after you enjoy